previously I was qualified as a lawyer in Nigeria. So I was called to the bar in 2019, and then I moved to the UK in 2020. I did a master's program, and like most people that have a very traditional way of thinking about law, um, one of the things I was thinking of was how to become a lawyer in the UK. So by the UK, by the way, I mean England and Wales. So I'm qualified as a solicitor of the Senior Court of England and Wales. It doesn't extend to Scotland or Northern Ireland. So I did some sort of research on both of them, but I think I was also guided from my experience in Nigeria that I did not really want to go to court. So the barrister route was kind of shut off for me on that path, and I was exploring more on the solicitor route. And around the time I came was when the SQE also sort of kicked off. So I learned about that path. So I had to do the SQE one, and also thought I had to do the SQE two. Yeah, I just went into it. I did the SQE one. So SQE one for people from common law jurisdiction, where I would assume most of the viewers here are from, is going to be around subjects that you're quite familiar with. So things like business law practice, property law practice, contract torts, um, wills and estate administration, or is it probate administration, then taxation. So those areas were sort of familiar. There was some things about administrative law, constitutional law, which would be a bit different. Obviously, from country to country, their constitutional law might be a bit different. And coming to a place like England and Wales as well, where you have to contend with an unwritten constitution, which is very different from if you are from Nigeria, because any Nigerian constitutional law class, I don't think you can escape a class without them screaming into your ears that the constitution is the ground norm, or whatever they call it. So that's a bit different because they have an unwritten constitution here, and that's not the constitution is not supreme. The parliament is supreme. So that was a bit different from what I had learned from Nigeria. But apart from that, the principles of church are the same. The principles of contract are the same. The principles of um, hierarchy of courts, which very much is from the common law jurisdiction, like the UK, like England, is the same. So that ground is a very similar ground. So it's a comfortable ground for you to go into, um, and start studying. So it was quite easy for me to say, well, these are the things that I know already, and these are the things that I have to now pick out and say, well, I need to learn more about it. Like areas of taxation, for example. Taxation is quite difficult, but the good thing about the exam is that the standard of the exam is what a newly qualified solicitor should know. So it's not necessarily that you are going to be a tax expert. But I'll just say if you are studying for the exams, not that you shouldn't, but don't waste your time. Um, Many of the questions, my year and subsequent years after and before me, the examiners don't waste their time. There's so many juicy areas of law, um, and just a few number of questions that they're going to rather ask you those areas rather than asking you questions that test whether you're a tax expert or not. And then with the SQA one, I think we'll talk about um, exam providers
Yeah.
subsequently. But with the SQA one, I did use Barbary because it was new for me as well. So I just thought maybe I should pay the extra fees and use a training provider. So I use Barbary, and the good thing about Barbary is that they say it from day one that they're not training you for awards in this exam; they're just training you to pass, which is what I needed because I was too busy. Um, and I finished I just finished
Yeah.
multiple exams around that period as well. That was just after the time I had finished my master's program. So the priority then wasn't for me
To
to
get a perfect score.
no, it wasn't. It was just to pass, and that's that. They were doing the barest minimum to make you pass. They did not waste your time, even in terms of their material. It was very abridged, and everything you needed was in those materials. So that was very useful for me. And then jumping into SQE two, obviously
Sorry,
I'd
before
passed
you go
SQE.
into SQE2, you mentioned the taxation. Just for clarity purposes, the tax part is part of business law. within the SQA one, or is
Yeah,
the
so
tax separate course?
tax is separate, but is still linked to the other subjects. So it covers areas like business law, as you rightly mentioned, but it also covers um wills and probate administration too. So it covers those areas within the SQA one that tax issues can arise from.
Okay.
I'm sure they'll be aware that for exams you have to learn the substantive areas of law, but you also have to learn the skill of answering exam questions as well. So with the way they draft the questions, sometimes it's not necessarily the incorrect answer. The incorrect answer might not be most very glaring. It might just be the most correct answer.
Okay.
So the other options might not necessarily be incorrect depending on the context, but there's obviously one that is most correct in that situation,
Okay.
which is a skill that you would get if you answer a lot of practice questions.
Okay. And at Babri, with the training provider, you got access to past questions and resources on answering
Yes.
questions you needed.
Yes, so not past questions because the SRA doesn't release past questions, but
Okay.
practice questions, and they also have practice questions on their website. That's the SRA website.
Okay.
But for Barbary, there was so many of them. So after each topic that they did, they had practice questions. Then after a group of topics too, they did practice questions, and then they did a lot of mock questions as well.
And the questions, and this is just off the top of my head, the questions that were on SRA website or with Babri, were they similar to what you encountered in the exam, or they were not really?
Well, if I'm being honest, the questions on the SRA website and Barbary made me feel like I was 80% prepared. But when I did the exam, I felt like perhaps what I had put, I was actually 40% prepared, if I'm being honest. The questions were a bit easier, um, which is quite shocking because most times people try to do practice questions to be a bit more
And
difficult than what
yeah.
you encounter, but they were too chill. And it was a good outlook to the exam. It was a bit more difficult than what I had anticipated. And it was that wasn't just my own feedback. There was a group I was on, and some of the people that used Barbary also said the question, so not the preparing, the training materials were up to the task of preparing for the exam, but the
Yeah.
questions that they put together as practice questions made it seem easier than what we eventually got in the exam.
Yeah, so it was like Barbary and all those past questions were like beginner questions, and then you got to like an intermediate or advanced stage
Exactly. Yeah.
kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay, and just to put that out there, she actually, or our guest speaker actually passed the exam on the first sitting, so it
Oh
was
yeah, I
like
did. Yeah, I did.
she had to be taken. So despite the
In
fact that
case
it
what
was
wasn't obvious, I don't think Favor would have invited me here if I didn't pass the exam.
so despite the fact that it was difficult, she still passed it on the first sitting. So that's like a form of encouragement that even though the questions you may encounter at the exam or might be different from the practice questions, it's still a possibility that you can pass it. So you were going on to the SQE too before I cut in.
Yes, and just to encourage people as well, the exam is for a span of 2 days. So even if the first one wasn't particularly good for you, just as normal exam thinking, don't let it affect the second day. You still have another paper to go into. And with the SQE one, it's a bit more advantageous than the SQE two because even if anything happens and you fail the FLK one. So when I was listing the subject, I listed the ones that were the functioning legal knowledge one and two. They separate it into days and into past levels as well. So they allow you to take the area that you receive the area that you failed and you don't have to receive the other area. You also don't have to pay for the other area too. So just think of that even if the first day has gone really bad for you, you still have more papers to write and like just have that mindset of continuing your exam and still giving yourself the opportunity to pass, even if it's just the second one. It's better than failing both.
And was it in person or online? The
No, it
exam.
was in person.
So SQE two now.
Okay, so SQE2 was a bit of a different ball game for me because I had passed SQE1 and at this point I was already mentoring people. to do the SQA one. So I feel like I got a bit confident. Not confident. I was confident is good. I'll say I got a bit cocky, and then I was just like, "Oh, I don't need any training provider." At this point also, I was also in a job that I had to go to court for. So, and SQE2 is also more of practice. So, whereas SQE1 might test your knowledge of substantive law, SQE2 is more modeled after Nigerian law school for people that have gone to Nigerian law school. So, it's more procedural law practice. So, if you have some experience with that area of law, then it might not be necessarily difficult for you. I saw some free courses on from QLTS. That's another training provider. They had some free questions. So I saw that as well. And the good thing about SQE2 is that the SRA website is a bit more in depth with their questions. So they give you the scenario, they give you two different answers. So there's one answer which is the excellent answer, and then there's one answer which is still acceptable. So when you answer the questions, you can see where you are. If you are off tangent, you know that you're not ready for the exam on both of the answers. But if you're somewhere in between, or even on the excellent one, then you know that you kind of know how they want you to answer the questions. So going into the exam more for SQE2, it was a lot more difficult. So there's an oral assessment where you also have to talk in front of an examiner. And those areas would be on interview and attendance notes, slash legal analysis, and then advocacy. So for the interview, your examiner is going to act as um, also a client, or maybe another solicitor from another organization, depending on what the question is about. And then for advocacy, your examiner is going to act as a judge, so a judge of whatever court, and you're going to appear before them. So obviously they're going to test how you address the court, how you handle legal issues, and also like certain areas surrounding your ability to present your issues as well. So it's a bit um it covers a bit more wider range than what the SQE does, which just tests your understanding of the black letter law. And then it is also on a lot more days as well. So we started with the writing assessment, and then we had a long break, and then came, I think my break was like 4 days in between, and then I came back for the oral assessment. Yeah, so that was the SQE2.